Here I am, wholly available. As for me, I will serve the Lord. Here I am, wholly available. As for me, I will serve the Lord. This song for me is probably a song that began my whole walk as a worshipper, as a worship songwriter, as someone passionate about mission. I had been on walkabout. I had been a Christian, but I went a long way away from God while I was a student in London at the Royal College of Music. And I got involved in the world of jazz, playing in clubs way into the early hours of mornings. But at one such night, God spoke to me with a question. Chris Bowater, what are you doing here? And that question caused me to leave that band. The quartet became a trio. I walked out of the club. I walked the streets of London, and I walked and found myself I found myself in Ealing in London. And I ended up sitting in the early hours on the steps of a church, Elam Pentecostal Church. And there I was doing business with God. I was battling with my own willfulness and seeking ways forward. What did God mean? You're not meant to be here. I have other things for you. And I remember saying to God, God, if you can do anything with a life as messed up as mine was at that time, here I am. That wasn't when the song was written. The song came a few years later, but that was the seed of the song. And it took me into Isaiah chapter 6 that opens like this. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord. The 6 very simple things I want to say. First of all, there was the reality of the times. Uzziah had been a great king. He just blew it at the end. He messed up. He tried to step outside of his God-given calling and move into something that God hadn't asked him to do. He ended up as a leper outside of his palace. It was in the year that King Uzziah died. I saw also the Lord. And I'd like to say it's important what you see in times of change, in times of disappointment, in times of where things have just gone so desperately wrong. It's important what we also see. And Isaiah, in this time of reality, saw also the Lord. And secondly, he had a revelation of God that was the most amazing revelation of God's greatness and awe-inspiring wonder and his holiness. He saw in this revelation angels calling to one another, "Isn't our God holy? Isn't our God holy? Isn't our God holy?" It was a thrice holy God that Isaiah saw. It was a time of reality, but it was a time of revelation. But it was also a time of recognition, because in that revelation there was a recognition that the world was a sinful world and his own life was full of impurity. Because that's what happens when we come into contact with holiness. And he recognized his own sin, his own uncleanness. But then out of the recognition came a receiving. In this day of reality, in this time of revelation, in this recognition, there was a receiving of an answer, because God always has an answer. And from the fire from the altar of the throne came live coals that touched his lips. How many of you know that you're not going to speak the same way after your lips have been cauterized? But literally God touched his lips so that he would be prepared to become the prophet of the nations, the messianic prophet indeed, that would announce the Christ. It was a time of reality. It was a time of revelation. It was a time of recognition and unbelievable receiving. And then he heard a voice. He heard a request. He heard a question. So Isaiah, you've seen the evil that's in the world and the desperation of the world today. But who is going to go for us? The triune God speaking with one voice. Great evidence of the Trinity, by the way. Who's going to go for us to speak my heart and my words and my will and my ways? On hearing that question, I have a feeling that Isaiah might have just glanced over his shoulder in case God was talking to somebody else. You know how we do? We hear a message and we're sitting there and we're thinking, I hope they're listening. That's a really good word for them. But God says, no, this is for you, Isaiah. I'm speaking directly into your life. Because when God asks us the question, church, he's not looking for information. He's certainly not looking for advice. And when he asked the question of who will go for us, he was asking the question of the man that God was purposing to be the prophet. Having looked over his shoulder and realized that he was actually the congregation of one, he kind of, like I did sitting on those steps, he said, God, will I do? I think God probably said like he said to me, in the absence of too many volunteers, yes, you'll do. Because the fields are white unto harvest, but the laborers are few. And Isaiah said, here I am, Lord. Send me. And in this time of reality and revelation and recognition and receiving, and the request that he heard, the question, the response was, here I am. My words, wholly available. Because God, he's not just looking for our ability, he's looking for our availability. The fields are white unto harvest, but oh, the laborers are so few. So Lord, I give myself to help the reaping, to gather precious souls unto you. The time is so right in the nations for words of power and authority. God's seeking out a very special people to manifest His victory. As salt, are we ready to savor? In darkness, are we ready to be light? God's looking for a very special people to manifest His truth and His might. Here I am, wholly available. Ask for me, I will serve the Lord. Ask for me, I will serve the Lord. Who will go for us?